Welcome to the Data Rockstars Coffee Podcast with me, Kelly Peters.
And me, Regina Jonas. On this week's episode, we're going to be talking about devices in your home, and I definitely anticipate an interesting discussion in the next 15 minutes or so.
Absolutely.
Kelly.
Firstly, I can't remember which episode it is, but this is not the first time we have talked about Alexa or Ring. In the past week, Amazon have been fined by the Federal Trade Commission for failing to adhere to certain American laws, one of which is about protecting children's data online. And they particularly made reference to Alexa, what appears to be everyone's best friend in the home, and Ring, a very popular product to supposedly protect people's home. The complaint that was made and has been upheld was that Alexa, Amazon, who is the owner of Alexa, was not deleting children's data at the parent's request. And even if the child didn't have an active profile anymore on Alexa, the data was still stored. And what I thought was, even though that is incredibly alarming to me, what I felt incredibly disturbing was that Ring, and I will be absolutely honest with every listener, I am not a fan of Ring or any door video recording device, is that staff within Amazon were accessing Ring recordings of people in the home. One employee who has subsequently been fired was, I would say, spying on a number of females where they had, for some bizarre reason, video recordings in their bedroom and bathroom. I don't know what you're trying to protect in there, but, still the employee should not have been accessing that. So from a data protection perspective, and I know this is in America, but if these are actions that are taking place in the States, you have to beg the question, is similar activities happening in here, where in Europe and the UK, we have much stronger data protection regimes. So I think it's just an interesting conversation that everybody is very gung-ho about having connected devices in their homes, but they probably, I might be talking out of tune, but how many people have actually checked their privacy and security settings to say, don't record, don't store the recording, things like that, or even considered where you place a Ring video. And in certainly in this country, it must have been about 2 years ago, in Oxfordshire, there was a court case involving an individual whose Ring video was recording outside the boundary of his home. So it was no longer in scope of the domestic purposes from data protection. So it then made data protection in scope and was classed as being spying on his neighbour. And he was asked to pay up £100,000 in court fees. That's just a normal, everyday homeowner who implemented something for security. So it interested me that we're still having these challenges, and a company that supposedly takes data protection incredibly seriously is having these issues.
Yes, and I think, you've covered a wide range of aspects of it there, and I think it's really interesting to the point you made about the fact that people will put devices in, purchase devices, put them in across their homes and not necessarily think about the wider implications of what they're installing, and again not necessarily think about how they can make them secure for themselves. So things like the simplest thing of checking whether the password is still on the default list, because, obviously those kind of lists make it onto the web. And if people wanted to then hack in, and there have been cases in the news of hackers getting access to all sorts of smart devices, particularly insecure security cameras or the child monitors that you get to make sure that your child is okay while they're sleeping and that you can keep an eye on them downstairs, that sort of thing. And because people don't understand the fact that if it's connected to the internet, or if it's got that connection to the outside world, you need to then think about how you protect yourself from people you don't want to have getting access. And I think maybe partly there's a bit of, well, why would they want to? What's of interest? But the question you have to ask is, if people are out there who, for whatever reason, and they might just be going, I'm doing it because I can, or they might have more nefarious purposes at heart. But do you really want somebody that you don't know accessing and having insight into your home and to what you're doing, where, you know, you're in the belief that this is a private area and people can't see what you're doing? You know, so if you're installing the Ring cameras for security purposes, so that you know if there's people accessing your home, burgling you when you're not there, then you need to make sure that you're setting it so it's not recording you when you are there and just living your day-to-day life, because otherwise who's watching you? And I don't know, people seem to have not necessarily considered those risks when they buy and install these great new products. It's the excitement of adoption and thinking, oh, look how great this is and look what I can do now. And there are some benefits, but if you don't take the steps to look at the settings, look at how it's set up, look at how you protect yourself and your privacy, you're opening yourself up to nefarious characters exploiting that and getting access to things they shouldn't. And you're absolutely right. You know, the employee at Amazon there accessing users' videos of females in their own home is abhorrent. And it's the risk that these people are out there and will exploit people's lack of understanding and knowledge about how to protect themselves and to make sure that they're kept secure in their own home and understand that threat.
Yeah, I think there are several points that I would pick up about what you've said. The point about people thinking, well, why me? If you've ever read anything about how hackers start, they start with the easy pickings. You know, they start with checking out whether or not they can hack into a Wi-Fi or not. And if you're living in the neighborhood of someone, your Wi-Fi signal will probably be reaching a little bit of a distance beyond your home, unless you've changed the settings of that. So you don't know whether or not you are a target or not. That's the reality, is that young hackers do try the easy pickings, and I would say all of us homeowners are likely to fit into that category. Sorry if I am the bearer of a lot of bad news there. Secondly, a lot of your devices are going to be connected to other devices. So your Alexa isn't just your Alexa. It might be connected to your fridge, which might be connected to Sainsbury's. It might be connected to your smart TV, which might be connected to Sky. So by accessing one device, what other devices can somebody have access to? In terms of the individual, I mean, we've seen this from our previous roles in the public sector. People, not everybody, I don't want to brush everybody with the same or tarnish everyone with the same brush, but people can get inquisitive. There have been many cases where people have spied on people. Tesla was in the news a couple of months ago where they were spying on people's smart cars, and some people doing some very interesting things within the parameter of their car, and that comes down to that education piece and trying to make sure that you as a company have advised your staff not to do it. But sometimes people are just nosy.
It's that curiosity piece, isn't it? And that lack of ability to stop themselves from doing something potentially that they shouldn't.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to consider as well is when you are looking at getting these types of new devices, and I think, Alexa, the Google equivalent, they were all released relatively cheaply and, given away as part of offers and stuff. And I think last time we also sort of highlighted that if you're wanting to get it into and collect a lot more data again, then what a great way of getting it into people's homes, making it accessible and cheap. But when you put them in, look at the settings, look at what you can do within the settings of the data it collects. It should be, if it's compliant with the law, set to privacy by default. But a lot of these systems are not, and the onus then comes to you as an individual to go in and check and see where can you make those choices that means that the data isn't captured in the first place. So you can turn off the fact that the recordings will be kept. I think the Alexa is set up to detect any noise, and you can again change that so it only responds to certain instructions. So it's really important when you look at getting these type of new devices, connected devices, security cameras, look at how it's set up, look at the privacy settings, look at the data that's being fed back to the organisation that's provided it to you. And my recommendation would be to reduce that as much as possible.
So I think moving on from that, bear in mind, I could probably talk about this subject for a very long time, but we don't have a significant period. The other thing I wanted to touch on here, which is also in a lot of people's home, and I myself use it, is Spotify. So recently, Spotify have been fined in Sweden because that's where Spotify is head office is located. So it was the Swedish Data Protection Authority that took action, had been fined 5 million euros for failing to appropriately respond to individual rights to have access to your data, and not just the responding to that, giving you the supplementary information about how your data, what's the purposes, who is it shared with, international data transfers, and all of that fun stuff. Now, what I found interesting about this story was that the complaint was lodged 4 years ago. It was originally lodged in Austria, and because Austria are not the lead supervisory authority, it was bounced over to Sweden. And when Sweden were not necessarily responding as NOYB, which is Max Schreim's business, if you're not familiar with that, they then lodged a complaint with the Swedish courts that the Swedish Data Protection Authority was not taking this matter seriously, at which point the fine was then issued to Spotify. But the key message is that a lot of people, when they think about financial penalties, they think about breaches in security. Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily appreciate that you can receive a financial penalty for failing to adhere to any of the principles of the law. And the right of access is one of those that we have, and we have the right to know how our data is processed, how it is used and shared. So I just thought it was a really interesting short story to share, because whilst we deal with a lot of subject access requests, the people we work with are really keen to be able to provide the appropriate information back to the individual, as well as the supplementary information.
So was this based on, because a lot of those big platforms will put the onus on a platform to provide that data. So rather than, where we work with sort of firms to provide a response or organizations to provide a response, it's very, it's more personal in that response. Whereas the big platforms like Spotify, Meta, Google will somewhere, if you can find it, have that, ability to request and download the data that they hold on you, because they've tried to make it easier from a processing and response point of view. So is it a gap in that mechanism of response that they are not actually making it easy, or as part of that response providing the information alongside it to explain? So they're just going, here's the data, off you go, have fun, and not necessarily telling us and doing that explanatory piece around what they've got, why they've got it, who they share it with, and all that kind of.
It's two-pronged. I think it's very much as you described. It wasn't easy to be able to download the information. Two, you didn't get all the information you was expecting to receive. And I think a number of people, because Max Schreim's company actively asks people to complain to them, so that if they think there's a sufficient number of complaints, they will then look into platforms, and then they will raise a complaint at a bigger level and stuff. So you are absolutely right. Platform providers should be, if you're a user of that platform, you should be able to get your user details in terms of your usage and profile data. You should be able to download all of that really at a simple click of a button. It might not be straight away. So, for example, when I've requested my data from WhatsApp, they were like, this is now being processed. You should get this in the next couple of hours. So it might not be instantaneous, because you've got to imagine the volume of data they probably have of you if you have been a subscriber of them for a long period of time. But it's the fact that they didn't provide everything that I think was the why the complaint was upheld, to say you can't say on your privacy policy you follow the rules of the law and you respect individual rights when actually your platform doesn't provide that information. So I think if anyone's listening, my takeaway point would be know what individual rights are and have mechanisms in place to be able to respond to those.
Well, that's an excellent point to finish on there, and some really interesting discussions and food for thought all the way through that episode. So hopefully everyone found that useful and interesting. And we thank you very much for joining us this week. If you've got any topics you'd like us to cover, please do get in touch on coffee@dbxuk.com. Don't forget to check out our back catalogue. This is episode 98, so there's plenty of others for you to explore. And of course, do join us next time for more coffee and chat about the world of data and data protection.